Hey my tech friends, thanks for stopping by. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already. Let's continue to grow this channel. Hope you guys enjoy this video. Hey guys, I figured with the uproar that's been taking place for security, I would touch base a little bit on our Linux operating system. Specifically, I'm talking about Ubuntu. I'm in 2204. This is the long-term support system. We can see we have updates available. I'm not going to do these yet. The reason why is because I want to walk you guys through upgrading the operating system to the latest build, the latest updates, and then I'm going to walk you guys through specifically some helpful tools that I've found over the years of using Ubuntu as far as malware scanning, rootkit scanning, and antivirus. Because while a lot of people out there will claim Linux doesn't get viruses, I will say that it is more difficult to get viruses on Linux because you have to actually execute the packages to install them to install your viruses. It doesn't mean that the system doesn't get viruses. It doesn't mean that the system doesn't have security issues. It doesn't mean any of that. It is more secure based off of the way it's designed than Windows is. So yes, from a security standpoint, Linux is still more secure than Windows, especially now with Windows 11. Windows 11 has a lot of add-ins in the actual operating system, put there by Microsoft for ad revenue and all that other junk. And as a result, it's reduced the security on Windows 11 even more so than Windows 10. And in a lot of ways, Windows 10 and Windows 11 are less secure than even Windows 7, even today, than in comparison to when it was actually supported, Windows 7. Now, with that said, I know that there's been recent security issues with Ubuntu, so I figured what we could do is maybe we could run some updates on Ubuntu. Maybe we could run a scan on Ubuntu. But before we run a scan on Ubuntu with Lynis scanner, maybe we could go over just stuff that you would have at your home in order to actually scan the operating system for malware or viruses or rootkits, and to make sure the operating system is up to date. So a little background about me is that when I started using a computer in a business type of scenario, I was strictly Microsoft Windows. I really didn't get into the Linux world until probably the tail end of the Windows XP world. Once Windows XP started to phase out and they wanted to go to Windows 7 and then Windows 8, 8.1, 10, and 11, that's when I jumped ship from the Microsoft side on the desktop side to Linux. But as far as the server side is concerned, I am still strictly a Microsoft server person. I've been dealing with servers since the days of NT4 and will likely continue on past the years of 2025 when they release the next version of the server operating system. So as I say that, the reason I say that is because there are other people that have used Linux for longer than I have, and they know more. So if you guys are one of those people that know Linux more than I do, please add something in the comments, any directions or indications or any additional software suggestions. I would love to check them out. I'm super into it at this point, really enjoy the Linux operating system and platform. There is the need to run Windows on occasion for other things, but for the most part, strictly run a Linux-based application, Linux-based system. So with that said, since Ubuntu is probably one of the most normalized system out there, one of the most used system by an end user that's not a Windows system, with the exception of maybe Mint, which is really kind of based on the Ubuntu platform anyway. I figure this is probably the best system we can use to, I guess, kind of go through the security stuff. Now, there's some settings changes I want to make before we do that, so let's get all of this underway. So I'm not a fan of the start menu sitting on the right-hand side or the left-hand side of the actual screen. So we're going to go into settings. Then we're going to go into appearance. And I want to change it to dark because I don't like the light. And then I'm going to change the position of the dock itself. So we're going to see dock on the screen. I'm going to put it at the bottom. Then I'm going to get rid of panel mode, so it gives me the shorter version of the actual thing. And I'm going to make the icons larger because it's easier for me to see larger icons. You guys, for the most part, that watch my videos are probably 18 to 25. In 20 years, you'll understand why that is, especially if you stick in IT. And I want to change the position of the new icons to the top left. That's so like if I create something and save it to the desktop, it'll start up here versus down here. Again, from being so used to Windows environment, I like it up there. And the reason why I like the shorter dock is honestly, it's reminiscent of the Mac look. And while I'm not a huge fan of the Apple products, I will say that I do like the dock configuration on the Apple product more than I like the dock configuration on Windows. Even though they're in roughly the same place, to me this works better than the one on Windows and is more comparable to like your Macintosh look. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to change my color standard here to blue, just because I prefer that. It's got nothing to do with whether one thing is better than the next. It's just my own personal preference. So that's the nice thing about Linux, is it gives you the option, the ability to change your preferences to make things more to like the way you like to look at them, the way that things look to you. So we can go in here too. We can look at the docking behavior. I don't really need any of that stuff. That's totally fine. And that's it. So now I'm going to close this window. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to open a terminal. Now, if the terminal isn't down here, what you'll have to do is you'll have to go into the, I guess, the waffle, the 9 key, the 10 key, whatever the heck you want to call that. You just click that, and then you'll find whatever you want to pin to the dock. You could right-click on it. You could do Add to Favorites, and it'll move it down here into the dock. The only problem is keep in mind, if you move it to Favorites, it doesn't exist in this menu anymore, so it's not a copy. It's physically moving it. So we could actually remove the help from favorites and it'll go back to here. So that's how I like my menu to look. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to open up the terminal. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to update the packages. I'm going to upgrade and then I'm going to update them again. So I'm going to do that by doing sudo apt-get update and then hit enter. Now this is where you're going to need to know that sudo or a password. And whatever your password is what your password is. I would have no idea as to what that is. And then the system's going to run the updates. Okay, next thing we're going to do is we're going to change the update to upgrade. And then hit enter. And this is where it's going to upgrade the replace. So look at it this way. So if you like say had, I don't know, say Chrome version like 23. And you wanted Chrome version 23.1, then 23.2, then 23.4. and so on and so forth. But maybe 24 comes out, and you don't want 23.5, you want 24. That's the difference between update and upgrade. So if you do update, it's going to give you 23.5, 23.6, 23.7. But if you do upgrade, it's going to give you 24. Now, there is a way to roll back. I'm not going to show on this how to do that, because, again, we're just upgrading and updating the system right now. So that way we could patch our system for the vulnerability that took place, I think it was last week or the week before, on our Ubuntu system. So this will automatically then download the package and apply the package to the system. And then once this is done, I'll do the update command again to see if there's any updates to the upgraded package. I know it sounds counterintuitive, but sometimes there is, and sometimes it doesn't work, and that's just the way it seems to be with the Linux or the Ubuntu world. Now, if somebody has a better way of doing this or knows a different way to do this, add it in the comments. Again, I'm not a Linux guy. I'm really not. It's more of a hobby for me, and I enjoy the operating system. As far as like usability, the last time I used a Linux system in an actual business world was when Sun Microsystems was still its own company. And I think it was Red Hat was what I was working on at that time with the Sun Solaris operating system. And they were not this. So again, it's not a thing that I think one is better than the next, or that Ubuntu or Linux is better than Windows or Windows is better than Linux. It's basically preference. But for me, I just don't have the background in this the way that a lot of you guys out there do, especially you young guys who grew up with this. You got to figure that when I was a kid, a brand new desktop computer was $15,000 and a brand new Toyota was $11,000. So, it was not likely that you were going to have a home computer. But with that said, so we now have it upgraded. We've done the upgrade and we've done the update. We're going to run the update one more time to just make sure the rest of the packages are good. And by the time you see done and done, that's it. So now we're going to just reboot. And then after we restart the machine, we'll jump back into this. Okay, so we're back up. So now I'm going to show you is how to do the same thing we just did, but through the GUI. So if you need to do updates, what you can do is you could click on the waffle. Again, if there's a better name for this, let me know. I know the show applications, but that's what it looks like. It looks like a waffle. So let's do software and updates. Great, we're in software and updates. And this is where we could set our updates. So right now we're subscribed to all updates. We're going to check daily. We're going to download and install automatically. We're going to display for weekly, and we're going to do for long-term support. Now we could choose to do any new version, which will change this from 2204 to probably 2310, which is the short-term support version. But I prefer to use the long-term support version because they tend to be more stable. If you like the type, or if you're the type of person that likes like the bleeding edge and all the new fancy shiny object stuff, then maybe you don't want to choose the long-term support. But keep in mind the short-term support is not as stable as the long-term support. So there is Ubuntu Pro. I'm not enabled for Ubuntu Pro on this particular system. On my primary, I do have a standalone desktop that isn't the one that we're currently on. That one does have the Ubuntu Pro enabled on it. I use that periodically for testing things. But that's how we got it set right now. So those are our software and updates. Okay, so once we have our updates set and configured, the next thing we're going to do is go back to our waffle. And then we're going to go to the software updater. And the system will check for updates. So there it goes. It tells us that we have updates available. And if we click on settings, we're going to go back to that same window that we were just in for the updates. So it doesn't really matter if you do this first or if you do this second. So once you do that, you just click install now, and it's going to prompt us more than likely for our sudo password. So there we go. And it'll download the updates and install the updates on the system. Now keep in mind, when you do this, sometimes what happens is that the sudo app doesn't necessarily get the snap package updates. So if you're trying to run updates on the snap packages, sometimes it's easier just to do the GUI than it is to do the command line. For whatever reason, that's been my experience. Now I don't know if that's a bug that maybe they'll fix in the later versions of Ubuntu. I know that the snap packaging is relatively new, so it could be just something funky in 2204 that'll be fixed in the next long-term support version. But for now, this is the way to make sure your snap packages are updated as well. So it says we have additional software, so let's do install now. So there we go. We can see updating snaps. Now it's going to tell me you need to reboot. So let's reboot this system, and then we'll log back into it. We'll start from there. Okay, so we're back into Ubuntu now, and we should be patched completely, but we're going to double check again by clicking our waffle and going to Software Updater. So we don't have any updates available. So we are completely up to date on the system, and just for S and giggles, we will check here as well. So Okay, so now let's talk a little security. So specifically, I've noticed that in order to do, I guess, testing to check for viruses and things like that, the only name in the game seems to be ClamAV. But I'm not a fan of ClamAV. I've run it in the past, I have it on systems, and it does work, but it's a little clunky. It doesn't really provide the output that I would expect. And I feel like for what it is, there has to be a better one out there. It can't just be ClamAV. Now, there are paid versions of antiviruses. Like I can install Sentinel-1 on a Linux box and I can scan it with Sentinel-1. That does work. There are, Kaspersky makes one. There are a variety of scanning tools out there to scan Linux for viruses, but a lot of them are paid and a lot of them are expensive, and I don't really need something so intrusive to run 24/7 because again, Linux itself is not Windows. It's not a live operating system. Windows is a live operating system. Live operating system is constantly doing stuff, and all you have to really do is add bad code into where it's constantly doing stuff, and you can make Windows do whatever the heck you want. With Linux, it's a little more complicated than that. There's a little more in-depth configuration required for that. So you can't really do the same thing. So with that said, let's add some tools onto this thing and check them out. So the first one I want to talk about is Lynis. Now, all of the ones that I'm going to show in this video are free. They are all open source, and you could follow the commands that I do in here to install them, or I will add the commands into the description so that way you know specifically how to install it and how to run it. But with that said, the first one we're going to install is Lynis. So what we're going to do here is we're going to do sudo apt-get install Lynis. We're going to hit yes, and that's going to install the Lynis package. Now, once we have Lynis installed, we need to run Lynis. So what we could do is, if we don't know what the Lynis commands are, it's relatively straightforward. And for the sake of this, I'm just going to make this a larger window and do clear so we can start at the top. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do Lynis-H. I hit the wrong key. I'm sorry. Lynis-H pipe, and then I'm going to do grep, and then I'm going to do double quotes and hit enter. So now what we have is these are all the commands for Lynis. So if we run this command up here, this will give you specifically what we're looking at here. So for instance, if we want to do an audit system, right? We want to audit the system to perform local security scan on the actual system. We could do that, or we could show all of the commands, or show the Lynis version, or update the info. So for the sake of this, what I'm just going to do is we are going to audit the system. So to do that, it's really actually pretty simple. We're going to do clear again. And then from here, we're just going to do Lynis space, and then we're going to do audit system. And then the system will scan our Ubuntu system for security issues. Now, I like this a lot more than I like ClamAV. I think it's much more helpful, it's much more beneficial, and it'll tell me specifically what it is that we have. And now, not only is it going to tell us like whether or not we have configuration issues, but it'll tell us specifically where those configuration issues are. So if you're trying to harden a Linux-based system like Ubuntu to make it less likely to get infected or more secure, it'll tell you specifically what it is that we're missing and what we need configured in here. And that's why I like this application. It really does give us good information. Like, partially hardened tells us that we have some issues. Now, keep in mind, this is an out-of-the-box Ubuntu system that I've done literally zero with other than spin up today, and we ran these updates on it. Other than that, this is the ISO file. So I'm expecting to see a bunch of stuff in here, and we do see a bunch of stuff in here. Like, for instance, here we go. We have unsafe. We have a lot of unsafe configurations in here. So these are things that would be beneficial to fix. But the thing is like once you know what we have that's unsafe in here based off of the Lynis commands, you could actually grab this data and you could go to Google and we could look to see specifically what we would have to do to fix things. And it gives a lot of information, Now, in these configurations, you're going to see something here that says skipped test due to non-privileged mode. And if we hit the up arrow, the reason why is because we did Lynis system audit. Now, if we get rid of Lynis system audit and we do clear, we start again at the top with Lynis system audit, and now we change this to sudo Lynis system audit. Now the system's going to run it in a different mode. So it's going to run it as your sudoer, or as the person that has root access to the system. So you may get different results depending on whether or not you run it as a user or if you run it as an admin. Now, the reason why you want to run it as both is because you want to know specifically what has access to what in the system, and if you need to secure anything based off of the sudoer versus just your regular generic user. So now if we start back at the top here, and we have that sudo command with the Lynis audit system, and we scroll through here, we see things that are not installed. We see things that are unsafe. We see warnings for the sudo permissions directory, which is something that you wouldn't see if you didn't have the sudo command run. And we see additional warnings, and we see different And then we come down here, and you'll notice that there's far less errors in here, or unsafes in here, than there were before. And the reason why is because the user has different access rights than the admin or the sudoer account has. Which really, that's all the sudoer is like, think of it like an administrator. It's not like, it's kind of somewhere between a power user and an admin, where it's not a full-blown admin. It doesn't have like root access, but it has access to run administrative tasks. So that's something to just keep in mind. And if we continue to scroll down here, we'll see additional configurations in here, because now we do have sudoer configuration set to actually do the scan. So we see the components. We have a firewall enabled, but we don't have a malware scanner installed. So let's get a malware scanner installed. Now, before we do the malware scanner, what I'm going to say is that we're going to do clear. And let's actually check the system for rootkits. Now, there's variables in the different software available for Ubuntu or Linux for Debian kernel. But one of the ones that I like a lot is actually called CHKRootkit, which is specifically just check rootkit. So let's get that installed first. So we're going to do sudo apt-get install CHKRootkit and hit enter. And yes. So now the system is going to install the check rootkit software. And once that's done, we could just do clear again. And let's run to check our actual rootkit. So if you don't know what the commands are, it's just CHKRootkit-H. And that will show us specifically what the commands are to run the CHKRootkit application. Now, we can run it in expert mode, which gives us additional details, or you can run it in quiet mode, which gives you additional details. But if you just want to run it without any of the options to have it scan, you just type in CHKRootkit and hit enter. Sorry, sudo CHKRootkit and hit enter. And that will scan the actual system for infections like rootkits. So if it has known rootkits like remote access software installed that somebody has access into your system, this scanner more than likely will find what that is and tell you it's infected. So we'll see things of not infected, not found, no suspect files, and then nothing found. So that's pretty standard. That's okay. The thing we don't want to find is, like, for instance, the following suspicious files and directories were found. So that's not typically good news, but that doesn't mean that there's necessarily a problem. That just means that we should look to see specifically what this is. Whereas if we look down here, it's looking for specific rootkits like the adorn worm. I'm going to call this the shy TC worm. Obviously, you guys could call this what you want, but that's the shy TC worm for me, for YouTube purposes. And if we come down here, we'll see that there's either additional not found. Now, if there is something found, this will turn red and say infected, which will tell you straight out if you have a rootkit or something, you know, of questionable nature installed on your system. Okay, so the last thing we're going to install on this particular system is our malware detect software. Now, this could work in conjunction with ClamAV. So if you have ClamAV already installed on your Linux system, you could use maldetect with it, and it'll actually use the ClamAV scanner if you have ClamAV installed, which hypothetically does speed it up. But again, as I stated in the beginning of this video, I'm not a huge fan of ClamAV. I just don't think it does a very good job. So to me, I'd like to scan a system with something other than ClamAV, which is why I found this application, which is called maldetect. So let's give it a shot. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to do the wget, we're to the actual URL. Now I'll put the URL in the description. So we're just going to hit enter, and that'll install the malware detect, or download the malware detect rather, to the actual system. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to run the command tar-zxvf maldetect-current.tar.gz. Now, specifically why is these switches here will allow us to extract the data from here. It'll show us what the name of the data is, and it will use the gzip configuration to do it. So in other words, it's unzipping the file. So on a Windows world, this is basically just we're unzipping the file. Now, I'm trying to give a comparison between the Linux and the Windows world, because I realize that a lot of you who may be getting into Linux or are interested in using Linux, are Linux curious, that you probably would like to know what these switches do versus just saying you're just going to do the -zxvf. Now what I'll do too is I'll put in the description specifically the tar wiki where you could go there and you could look to see what all these switches do if you're really interested in really digging down specifically what they do. I'll add that detail into the description text so you could see that. So what we're going to do is we're just going to run this command on here to extract this. So we're going to hit enter. There we go. So now we have all the files, and you can see with the command to export, so export the files, but then provide the file name, the -f, which would give us what these specific files are. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is we want to change directory to this directory here. Now, the reason why I say this directory here is because when you download the actual software with the wget, it could be any number of different versions. It could be 1.6.5, .7, .12. It doesn't, I don't know when you guys are watching this. Hello in the future. Anyway, so we want to get to this maldetect 1.6.5. And to do that, we're going to just change directory to it. So if we just do cd space maldetect 1.6.5 and then hit enter. Now we're in that directory. Now, if you don't know this already from the Windows world, if you do cd and then type in MA and then hit the tab on your keyboard, it'll auto-fill the rest of the stuff so you don't actually have to type it out. Just something important to keep in mind on Linux is that it's case sensitive. So on Windows, you're going to want to start the sentence with a capital M and think that if you type in capital MAL and then hit tab, it's going to do anything. It's not, because it doesn't know what that means. Everything is case sensitive in Linux. All right, so the next thing I want to do is we want to actually ls so we can see in there. Now keep in mind that you should be able to dir. It's the same thing. The only difference is the ls command is actually going to change the color of your files versus your installer versus the cron dealer, which is also an installation package considered by ls. So if you do dir, you just get all white out letters, but it still works. So you could still use dir to do directory or ls to list the directories. The reason why I bring that up is, again, if you're in the Windows world, you've probably used dir for most of your life, so getting into ls is likely not something that you're going to remember every single time, and it's okay. You can still use dir. It's just you won't get the same output color configuration that you would with ls. Sorry, it was easier to just clear the screen so we could start at the top here, and I will we'll kick that off again. So what we want to do actually is sudo /install.sh, and the reason why is because the sudo command through the GUI, for whatever reason on this particular Ubuntu system, is having a problem. So through the command line, I just write sudo, and then we'll do the install, and we'll hit enter. There we go. So we've installed it, and we've installed the 17,637 signatures. So now what we have to do is we have to set the config, and then once we set the config, we could then scan the system. Okay, now you could use Vi, which is a text editor. I prefer Nano. That's up to you. If you don't have Nano installed, it's just sudo apt-get install Nano, and then hit enter, and it'll install Nano. It should be installed by default in Ubuntu, at least in the later versions. So we're going to edit the config file, and to do that, it's just sudo nano, and then the user local maldetect, and then conf.maldet. Now keep in mind, Linux is / and Windows is /. That's just the way it is. So we're going to hit enter now to open the config file. Now at this point, this is where we would go to actually config things like enabling email alerts. So if you want to set up email alerts where the system will send an SMTP bounce off of like Gmail to notify you that the machine is infected if it gets infected, that's what this will do. So it's really a much more in-depth package than what you're going to get on your ClamWin or ClamAV antivirus configuration. Now you notice we have enabled for auto update of the signature, so auto update our actual antivirus files, and you'll see the additional details in here. So you see a variety, so like scan depth, so 15 max. You can make it as much as you want. If you have files and folders that go back 60 deep, you could do that. If you have this shared with a Windows system, you want it to scan your Windows file system, if you want to use this as the antivirus to scan your Windows system, you could do that too. And yeah, there's, like I said, there's just quite a bit in here as far as the configuration is concerned. Now, I'm not going to go through every single one of these things because for the sake of running the actual scan, I don't need to make any of these changes. But if you want to say not quarantine and clean, and you just want it to clean before it tries to quarantine the file, you change that to 1 and save it. If you want to have quarantine hits, so right now it's set for alert only. If you wanted to auto move that file to the quarantine, you just change it to 1 and it would do that. And you know, there's, like I said, there's variables in here and variety of changes and configurations. And feel free to go through it once you get it installed and make any changes that you want. But for me, there's absolutely no reason to do that. So let's exit out of here. And if you don't know what that is, it's just Control+X will exit out. So we exited out at this point. So now let's just run a scan on this system. So to run a scan, it's really very easy. All we'll have to do is we'll do sudo, and then we'll do maldetect, or maldet, and then -a for all, and then hit enter. And now the system will scan on the entire system. Well, the antivirus will scan the entire system for malware, or you know, it'll find malware, it'll find Trojans, ransomware, you name it, it'll find it. So between this and then our CHKRootkit software, and then as well as our Lynis system to check for security or configuration issues on Linux, this is a really easy three-step setup to go through your configuration and make sure that you're not infected with anything. Make sure that your configuration is set so that way you're secure, and then use Google to look up your configuration settings as to why maybe you're getting alerts for things that you shouldn't get alerts for. But this is what I've found to be much more helpful than just the ClamAV. Now keep in mind, if we install ClamAV on top of this, we could use the GUI ClamAV software to scan with the malware detect software. So it gives you the ability to add these signatures to the ClamAV and use that as one package to scan. If that's something that you want to do, then go for it. But like I said in the past, I'm not a huge fan of ClamAV. It just, to me, just doesn't seem to do a very good job. So, I mean, if you guys have a different opinion or have had different circumstances with the ClamAV product, please leave a comment down below and let me know what you think. And hopefully somebody finds this beneficial. Again, I'm not a Linux engineer by any stretch of the word, but I do like to tinker with it, and I do really enjoy the operating system. So once again, if somebody else knows better software down there, definitely leave us a comment. Let me know what to look for, because I would be very interested in testing something else out. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this one. You guys take it easy.